Welcome. I just wanted to thank Andy for having me here at Superfly Bonsai. For people who don't know me, my name is Robert Mahler. I am from East Greenville, Pennsylvania, which is about an hour and a half east of here, in the border of Lehigh and Bucks County, where I run a bonsai nursery. Just to give a little bit of background history about myself, I studied in Japan for 4.5 years. I studied with Susumu Sudo, who's in Tochigi Ken, which is in Tochigi Prefecture. And people ask me, well, where's Tochigi Prefecture? Tochigi Prefecture is 2 hours north of Tokyo. So if you go due north, Tochigi Prefecture will be there. And it was about 45 minutes from Fukushima. So just to give you an idea. Just to give you a little bit of background, my teacher was well known for 4 different types of trees. Japanese azaleas, Satsuki Azaleas, Japanese flowering apricot, Japanese white pine, and most deciduous trees. So deciduous trees meaning Stewartia, multiple others, Camellia he was big in. Those 4 plants were his forte. Although he worked on all trees, his father was, the nursery was 3rd or 4th generation, and it's always been Satsuki Azaleas. The nursery doesn't exist anymore. My teacher's out of the business. He's now a landscaper. Don't ask me why. I know the reason why, but he is not actively running a bonsai nursery. So, topic today, what are we going to talk about? Satsuki Azaleas. Who here has one? I don't see many hands. Okay. Oh, you should. Is it doing okay? Yes. Good. So the topic today is Satsuki Azaleas, and what we're going to talk about is the proper maintenance and care of these trees. We're going to do a wire demo once I'm done going over that. We're going to wire this tree in the morning until about noon, and then I'm going to wire another tree in the afternoon after the lunch break. But anyway, what I want to go over first is some basic important care techniques with Satsuki Azaleas. Number 1, everybody knows one thing, they flower. There's over 2,000 different types of flowers in Satsuki Azaleas. Not all of them are bonsai. There's 2 different areas in Japan. If you go to Kunuma Prefecture, which is about 30 minutes southwest of Tochigi, that's where Kunuma Suchi or Kunuma soil is dug. And the reason it's dug there, that's where they grow azaleas. So azaleas are grown in the ground to become thicker. So this tree at one point in time was in the ground and grown to become thicker. So in Tochigi Prefecture, it's very close to Kunuma, so there's a lot of Satsuki bonsai in that area. If you go to Tochigi, you're going to find these sitting on someone's front step of their houses. They're everywhere. A very common tree in Kunuma, very common tree in Tochigi, very popular in the Japanese mob world. And I'll get to that in a second. Japanese mafia, this is their favorite tree. So because of that, my teacher stopped working on them because he didn't want to have correlation and association with the mafia. So he stopped azaleas because of that. Because the Japanese women really like them, so the Japanese yakuza used to buy them for their families and so forth to have at the house. High-end ones. So, and that's still the case today. That's still the case today. So anyway, what do we know about Satsuki Azaleas? Come on, what do we know? I like to get the audience involved. Okay. They're acid. They like acid soil. They like acidity. What else do we know? What are some of the key points that we know about Satsuki Azaleas? Or azaleas in general, not just the tops of azaleas are weak. For instance, a gentleman brought in I believe his name's Scott, brought in a Kurume azalea, top of the tree died out. We'll go over in a minute why that may have happened. and how you can stop that from happening. So Satsuki Azaleas, there's 3 things you should know. They flower, they have weak tops, and they're vigorous growers. They don't thicken quickly, that's why they're placed in the ground. A tree of this caliber is probably 30 to 40 years old. So this is a rooted cutting that they wire, they shape, they put it in a pot, they grow it for a couple of years, they take the wire off and they put it in the ground and let it grow into a large shrub. When you see these things in the ground, you would never think they were bonsai. You would think they were landscape trees. Because what they do is they come in with hedge shears and they cut the tops off of them with hedge clippers to allow the light to get inside of the tree so none of the branches inside die out. So, some of the key points that you need to know about Satsuki Azaleas, there's 2 things. So when I was in Japan, we would go out into the fields and we would dig a certain amount. He had 3 fields of Satsuki Azaleas with trunks, I kid you not, trunks were this big. Been in the ground 50, 60, 70, 80 years. My job was to dig them. My job was to clean them. I was a slave boy. I was to do anything to keep those trees healthy, alive, and so forth. And I'm going to teach you some of the things that I was taught there that have changed over the years. And there's reasoning behind it. So in Japan, we would dig them up out of the ground, and we would bare root them. All the soil will be removed. And they're grown in pure Kanuma. 100% pure Kanuma. They're not grown in Akadama or anything like that. They're grown in pure Kanuma, even in the ground. So they bring in loads of Kanuma, they place them in the ground, and they plant them in the Kanuma. So when it's placed in the Kanuma, they're allowed to grow, and they produce sizable trunks. You have to remember there's 2 things about Japan that we don't have here. They have longer growing season. Where I lived, it was more like a zone 8 or a zone 9. So it did get cold in the winter, but the winter was short. It was hot, 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 and humid. So actually, inside of the trees would actually root themselves together from debris and so forth because of the high moisture content. They're very easy to root from cuttings. So when we dig these out, we remove all the soil, cut the branches back hard, repot it in straight Kanuma. Always, always repot in straight Kanuma. You don't add any other akadama, you don't add pumice, always goes into straight Kanuma. They're placed in the greenhouse with high humidity and they'll rebud out and new branches are developed. That's what happened to this tree 2 years ago. It was dug out of the field, put it into a training pot, allowed to grow, wired once, and then we imported them this spring. Okay? If you have questions, please raise your hand. I can answer them as I'm going through if I'm not clear about something. So anyway, when I was in Japan, I was always taught Japanese maples, any deciduous trees you want to develop nabari. So when you develop nabari, you don't want roots that are growing off the bottom of the tree. You want to push the roots out to the side so that the nabari grows out along the top. And you want to clean them out so that the roots continue to grow and the nabari becomes larger. That process was applied to Satsuki Azaleas. Okay? That was the wrong process. So I'm going to say about 40 years ago, there was a study started on people noticing the tops of azaleas were dying out. And what I mean by that is the tops of azaleas would turn brown and they would just die off, and you would have nothing below, nothing above, I'm sorry, that was alive. Everything below it died. And the reason they figured out after studies, they would give these plants to these, they gave 4 bonsais to a local university to do studies on, to figure out why the tops of the trees were dying out. They didn't know if it was relevant to age, relevant to the fact that it's not a true tree and it's a shrub. They sucker from the bottom. As you know, azaleas always put out suckers towards the bottom. They didn't know it was relative to that. They didn't know if it was climate or whatever. Well, what they found over the years is, as we do with maples, they would flip the trees over and we cut all the roots off the bottom. That's a no-no. On azaleas, not on maples. That's a different animal. What happens is all those roots that are coming off the bottom of the tree would actually feed the top of the tree. So what happened is we were cutting those roots off thinking that we're going to push the roots out sideways. And what happened is we were cutting the lifeline off the tree. I can show you pictures when I was in Japan that I don't have with me now, but I have trees with trunks this big that are over this tall with no tops, one branch, because the tops died out because of that process. So, key point is if you have a tree that's imported or if you're digging a tree out of the ground, you want to leave those feeder roots grow downward. Azaleas, as they become older in Japan, every 3 to 4 years in the ground, they were dug up, root pruned, and put back into the soil again. And the reason behind that is, the reason they wanted that to happen is they didn't want world roots to happen into the soil. They'll get multi-layers of roots in the soil, so they wanted to keep them shallower. So that's a must, and that's very important that that's done. So anyway, the key point with Satsuki is do not cut the roots off the bottom of the tree. So if you're collecting trees out of nature, like this one, or the shrub next door, or at your mom's house if she wondered where your azalea went, when you dig it out, leave the feeder roots in the bottom of the tree. So what I'm going to guess what happened here with this tree is the same process that I had talked to you about. There was feeder roots on the bottom that were feeding the top of the tree. They were cut off. I'm 90% sure that's what happened. And what happens is it loses energy. Once the top of the tree starts declining, you can never resave it. There's nothing you can do. Humidity, I've packed sphagnum moss around it, you're not going to recover that. So that top of the tree is gone. Azaleas are very hardwood, so they have a high, they're very dense, so they're not long last as gin. So it will rot very quickly unless you use like a Minwax wood hardener or something like that to prevent it from drying out and decaying, because it will rot very quickly. So I do not like to add too much gin. You have to add sherry in certain cases because the tree in the center may have rotted out and died out. That's always a possibility. Some other key points that you need to know about Satsuki Azaleas. They're very vigorous growers, but there's certain things that are done at certain times of the year. This is the first thing that you need to know about Satsuki Azaleas. All pruning, all wiring, any repotting is done during or after flowering. If you want to repot in the spring, that's fine. But if you're doing major repotting, you want to do it during the flowering season. So what I mean by that is, if you're cutting the tree back because it's overgrown, it's important that you do it during flowering. I don't like to cut them hard when they're just getting ready to coming out of the spring. So cut them back during flowering, cut all the flowers, cut all the new growth off, and let it grow out. Second thing, flowers should be removed as quickly as possible unless it's in a shell. Satsuki Azaleas will bloom for almost 2.5 months because they don't bloom all at once. On each stem, this is getting ready to set flowers now. If you look at the tips, they're starting to close. And on each stem, there'll be 3 to 4 flower buds, depending on the species. This is a variety called Hiranomaro. Hiranomaro, moro means round. Motto, round. So this one has a white flower with a red center. It's a new variety. A newer variety. It's probably 30 years old, but it's newer in the bonsai world. So as those flowers develop, which are starting to develop now and they'll set, you don't want to cut any of this back because then you're going to lose your flower. So if it's for show or anything like that, do not cut now. And the reason I like to cut during flower is it gives it time to recover so it can set flowers for the following year. So during that period, you can cut them back. You can wire them, and you can repot them during flowering, okay? So those are the 3 things that you must do at that point. Anytime that you have a large branch that you're cutting off, you want to make sure that the cut is clean with a knife and smooth as possible. Just don't use a concave cutter and make a cut that rough cut, you want to go in there with a knife and cut it and smooth it. And the reason you want to do that is the cambium layer on Satsuki Azaleas is paper thin. They're not like a maple, they're not like a pine. You can rough cut a pine. You don't even need to put cut paste on the pine other than the fact that it's going to seep out the sap. The product you want to use, I don't know what Andy has. I think he probably has Keno and any of the Bonsai Bond or anything like that. You want to use that on there. You do not want to use cut paste. You do not want that area to dry out. You want to clean down the green cambium and use a liquid cut paste so that it seals it. The reason you want to seal it is so that it will heal and cover over. If you use regular cut paste, it will dry out. The cut paste will dry out as it starts to heal, and it won't heal all the way over. And that's a problem. The sealant will stay on there until that healing process is done. To accentuate the healing process and to speed it up, what you can do also, if you have adventitious buds that grow out of the scarred area, you want to let those buds develop along that scarred area, and that wound will close itself. If you do have buds that pop out there, a lot of times we break them off because we don't need them. In this case, you want to leave them there because that will help the callus formation close the azalea. It's very important that you get that to close. And the reason I'm saying that is you do not want exposed dead wood. Dead wood will lead to problems down the road of rot and other problems. Again, that's very important. Pruning. The trees, these Satsuki will be defoliated every 2 years. Total defoliation. Right, either during or right after flowering. They should be repotted every 2 years. Every 4 years, they should be bare rooted. Biggest problem with Satsuki Azaleas, everybody here, those that has azaleas, have very fine roots. And when they're growing very vigorously, they do this. So when they're very vigorous, and when this happens, water can't pass through. That's why bare rooting is important. On these trees, I'm going to tell you, these were imported from Japan. There's over 100 pieces. I brought 9 today. These pieces here will not root in until 4 or 5 years because of the traumatic bare root. Trees coming in from Japan have to be totally removed of soil. Soil has to be all completely removed, power washed off, so there's nothing on there but bare root. They come packed in sphagnum moss with a plastic bag or a plastic sheet wrapped around with rubber bands. So it's very important that the first few years of this tree's life, the vigor is brought back up again. Satsuki Azaleas, you should have 99.9% success. There should be 0 death. 0, and I mean that, when you import bonsai. Japanese white pine, if you get 85 to 90%, you're good. I've seen 50% and still feel better. You're going to have losses with white pines. They're much more difficult to reestablish here in this country. So Satsuki Azalea is very important that you let it recover, fertilize it very heavily. I haven't started the fall fertilizing yet, but I will shortly. And we'll go over fertilizer in a minute. So, talk about some insects that attack Satsuki Azaleas. So you have lacewing. Is one of the big ones. The second one that you have is thrips. Thrips are very tiny, almost microscopic, and what they do is they cause the new leaves on the tree to curl. So as the new leaves come out, they look a little brown tinnish, and they'll curl under and they'll stop growing and they'll become deformed. That deformity is from the thrips attacking the leaf. So I would use a systemic, something like 3-in-1 Bear, and or 3-in-1 Bear, or a couple other things. Malathion, which is really toxic, but Bear 3-in-1 is pretty good. I do not like to use organic-based products. I will not use neem oil on these. Do not use neem oil. They will burn the crap out of them. They'll drop their leaves, too much sun, they'll burn and they'll drop. Okay? So, with that being said, you have thrips. They do on occasion get attacked by spider mite. Not too often, but on occasion they do. So that's something else that you have to look for. For the most part, azaleas are pretty resilient as far as insects go. Unlike Prunus mume, which have tons of bacterial diseases, tons of fungal diseases, and tons of borer issues, these are pretty straightforward on health-wise, except for those 3 insects. Those 3 insects are a major problem. So on trees like this, well, we got them in from Japan. If you looked on the table over there, some of them I turned the pot. When I had 10 people, we repotted 121 trees in one day. So they weren't exactly in the pot where they were supposed to be. So some of them are like this, and that's the front. Some of them are like that. I didn't have time to go to each one and make sure it was placed properly, but that's not the point. The point is that they're healthy and they've recovered. So, 2 more things. Satsuki Azaleas are acid loving. Okay? Kunuma is an acidic soil. Okay? If you import trees from Japan, you have bought an imported tree from Japan, do not change the soil. Do not go to a pumice. Do not go to Akadama. Do not go to American bonsai soil. I'm going to be snotty here. Go with the Kunuma. If you want the tree to live, you want the tree to survive, it has to be Kunuma soil, or you'll have problems. So all my trees, all the soil came from Andy, went to straight Kunuma soil. Yes?
This kind of plant can tolerate the hot.
No problem. Hot. They like the heat and they like cold. They don't like super cold. What Japanese consider cold is what we would wear short sleeve shirts around here. 27, 28 is cold to them. They can take the heat, yes. And high humidity. They love high humidity. That's not a problem.
Yeah, I asked it because when I saw the videos in YouTube of the Azaleas, they have like a stream.
They have that streamers over it. Yes, you could. Over the years, they've changed their prospects, so they have those metal streamers that reflects the heat. That's in Kunuma bonsai. They'll take the heat if you want to get. So another thing is, it depends on what stage your bonsai's at. Okay, if you put the tree in more shade, you're going to get elongated growth. They'll grow fine in shade or part shade. If you want tighter, firmer growth, you want to put it in full sun. So a finished tree, you want to put in full sun to get that tighter growth, more compact growth, okay? So that's very important. The other thing I want to bring up is on pruning. Do you know why every 2 years you cut the foliage off? Does anybody understand that process? The vascular system of an azalea is very different than a maple. Well, it's close to a maple. It's very similar to sometimes crepe myrtle. What happens is the growth on the tips gets smaller and smaller. If you look at that azalea there, we probably can find some branches that are starting to happen. Azaleas have multiple buds every 1/4 of an inch on the branch. So if I cut it here, and if you look at this, there's probably 30 buds within an inch of this branch. They're just covered with buds. So what happens is when you go in and cut it, you have multiple buds come out of one area. That grows, you cut it back again next year, multiple buds come out of there. What happens is that vein or that structure that pulls the moisture to the tip of the growth becomes very thin and dies out. If you don't go in there and cut it, you'll have dieback on that branch. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay? So it's very important that every 2 years that the tree is cut back into here so that new growth can push out, because if it doesn't, these new tips will eventually die back because they multiply so quickly. And the vascular system on azaleas, when it's that small and that fine, will actually deteriorate and can't carry the fluid to the tip. And then you have dieback issues. These back every 2 years. It's a must. Okay? Yes?
You talked earlier about removing the flowers.
Yes.
Is that as soon as they start to recede, or
Right.
Do you take the flower off as soon as it opens, or do you leave it open for a while?
I like it to, you gotta realize when it's in flower, all the energy is going to the flowers. If you take a handful of flowers and you put it in your hand and squeeze it, you'll actually get water come out. So what I like to do is as they're starting to fade, then I'll remove them. But as his point, the other thing is you want to make sure you get the seed heads off. I see there's a couple of azaleas over there that still have the seed heads on. I gotta pop them off. But you want to remove the seed heads off so it doesn't pull the energy from the tree. So you want to clean them all off. But as they're fading, in Japan, if the tree was not going into a show, we would just cut all the flowers off. If you want to enjoy the flower here, what I suggest to most people is, if it's raining outside and you want to enjoy the flower for a while, bring it in. Because if you leave it out in the rain, the flowers are going to get destroyed. So bring it in, take the flowers off that are injured, leave it in the house for a couple of days, and then when it stops raining, put it back out. This year, the trees were inside all the time, because that's all it did was rain in the spring. So that being said, the flowers, I like to remove them as much as possible because all that energy is going up to the tree, and that's when you're going to get your best energy to the growth after the flowering is done. So a lot of these didn't flower to the full capacity that they could this year, only because they were cut back before they were shipped for health reasons. They cut the roots back, they bare root them, they cut the top of the tree back, and then when they get here, they have a few flowers so you can see what it looks like, and then you can go from there. Does anybody have any other questions before we move on? Going back to azalea, so I use acidic fertilizer. And then the two fertilizers I use, I make my own. And when I don't have time to make my own, I use Hollytone. So, and it's very simple. So I don't like to sprinkle it on the surface because I don't want to clog the pores of the azaleas. So what I'll do is I'll stick it in tea bags, disposable tea bags, the paper tea bags that you buy on Amazon. 100 of them is like $4, 200 of them. Gentleman back there is my student, and he knows about filling all of them, all the tea bags with that. The other product that I use is a mix that I make myself. It's very easy, it's very simple to make, it stinks. But you will have the greenest acid-loving plants in the world. So the mix I use is 11 parts cottonseed meal, 5 parts bone meal, and a half a part of muriate of potash. M-U-R-I-A-T-E of potash. The muriate of potash is for roots, so that's 0010 or 0015. With those numbers, what you do is you take that, cottonseed is very acidic, and the bone meal kind of neutralizes some of the acidity. So you go and mix that all together, you add water. You can't apply it to the bonsai directly. Does anybody know why? The fertilizer is hot. What I mean by hot, it hasn't decomposed, it hasn't fermented yet. If you take that fertilizer and put it on the tree, you're going to kill your tree. So what you need to do is you mix it up with water. And I used to study with Chase Rosade also. Everybody knows Chase Rosade. So long time ago, this is going back and way back, when I first started studying with Chase Rosade, he had a gentleman from Japan. His name was Mikio Oshima. Mikio Oshima is not in the bonsai anymore. He went into dogs. Don't know why, but he's in dogs now. But his son still runs a bonsai nursery. So I was the man that had to mix the fertilizer. I was the slave for the day. So I'm in there mixing this fertilizer, and I asked him, I said, what consistency? He says, I got my hands are all covered with this stuff, and I go, what's this mean? He goes, haha, I made you touch your ear. Now I got the fertilizer over my ear, but you mix it up. He wanted the consistency of an earlobe. So this is the big problem, is that you mix it all up, you wet it, you mix it up, you cover it with burlap, and you let it sit for 6 to 7 days. And you'll get this gray mold comes over top. Oh, one last ingredient I forgot to tell you about. Make sure you add powdered 7 or liquid 7 to the mix because of the insects. Because they're gonna come. You're gonna have flies. So by doing that, it ferments. And once it ferments, you make it into a ball. It's a mess. It's a mess, but it works. And then you can put it on trays, dry it out, break it up, and you can use it for fertilizer. That mix is one of the main fertilizer companies in Japan, what they use as their main fertilizer components. I don't know which one it is, but it works very well. And only acidic plants. I'll read the ingredients again. So it's 11 parts cottonseed meal, 5 parts bone meal, a half a part of muriate of potash, and 2 or 3 tablespoons of powdered 7. Mix it together so that the insects don't overwhelm you.
Can you buy this at your place?
No, because I only gonna make it for myself. I'm not selling it. Yeah, my student doesn't want to be involved with that. My student doesn't want to be involved with that. Does anybody have any other questions before I move on?
I have a question. You were saying about you don't cut roots off the bottom when you're repotting, so how do you...
Off the bottom, yes, you trim them off the bottom. I'm talking about the base of the trunk on the underside. You'll have roots that are going down like this. Those are the roots you want to save. We've always been taught to make it concave underneath, clean all those roots out. You don't want to do that with azaleas. Those roots that are coming straight down off the bottom of the trunk. So off the bottom of this trunk, you're going to have roots that are going straight down. Those roots carry the fluids to the top of the tree. Okay? Yes?
Do you stop fertilizing in the summer and pick up in the fall again?
Yes. Yes, I do. So all the fertilizer was pulled off of these when it really got hot. And then we'll start again in the fall again. We'll do Hollytone. You can use any fertilizer, but I prefer acidic because they really like their acid look. Acid.
When do you stop?
So I'll start probably in another week. I'll probably put 2 applications on and I'll stop about mid-October. I'll let the old fertilizer on there over the winter. I'll remove it one way or the other. Yeah. So I'm clear again. The base of the trunk, under the side of the trunk, you can cut roots off. You just don't want to remove those roots from the bottom of the tree. So if this is the nabari and this is the bottom of the tree, you want these roots to grow down. Okay? You can remove those roots that are too long and clean that all out. Okay? All right. So the azalea we have up here today, we're going to wire this out. Azaleas do not like copper. You have to use aluminum. You'll never have an Satsuki Azalea wired at a show, so they won't use copper. Honestly, once you wire an azalea once or twice, let's see if I can move over here to stop that. Once you wire an azalea once or twice, you don't need to wire it anymore. From that point on, it's all clip and grow, cutting it back with scissors. So, Satsuki Azalea, very easy. It's not easy to wire. Do you know why? Does anybody know something else about azaleas? Brittle. So, you got to be very careful. If you hear something crack, I didn't do it. But they do crack, they do break. So you have to be very careful and slowly go in there and clean it out. So I'm going to get hit and started on this, and we're going to wire these branches out. This is a good time of year to wire as well. It's not as hot. The trees are starting to set buds. Again, so this is still a pre-bonsai. This is not a finished bonsai yet. What I mean by that is, again, it was imported, it was allowed to grow, it was allowed the new growth to be put on, and now we can start to develop branches and move branches into positions that they need to be. Okay? Does anybody have any questions?
These were just plotted up this year.
In January 29th this year.
It's established enough.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, if you look at some of them on the bottom, the roots are coming out of the bottom of the pots already. If this was white pine, no. I wouldn't be doing this. I wouldn't be touching it with wire or anything for 2 years. But azaleas, not a problem. They recover very easily from bare rooting. They like to be bare rooted. Okay? So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sit down, I'm going to take a look at the tree to make sure the potting position is pretty much what it's supposed to be. So again, there's a tag on here, and the tag has the picture of the flower if anybody wants to come see it. And you can come up here if you want to. Just don't block the camera. So this is the picture of the flower. So anyway, Japanese azalea, the great thing is they root very easily from cutting. And because they root very easily from cutting, the nabari on these trees is usually very easy to develop because they send out multiple fine hair roots around the base. And when that happens, it's very easy to develop a nice nabari around the tree. Okay? Let me get my tools. All right. Now on this tree, just to give you some ideas. So this tree was grown in the ground. You can see there's some branches on here that were allowed on here to thicken the branches. This back branch back here was allowed on here to thicken the trunk. And eventually may have to be removed. We're not going to wire any part of this tree that's over a 1/2 inch in diameter. If you wire anything over a 1/2 inch in diameter, you'll crack it. Unless it's a longer branch that you just can kind of guy wire down. So we're going to go ahead in here and start wiring this tree out. Please ask questions. Anything that I didn't cover or you want to know about.
When you defoliate,
Mm-hmm.
what's your technique? How do you do that? Are you pulling the leaves off?
You get the biggest, longest scissors that you can and pretend you're a hedge clipper. I'm not joking. Get the longest tip that you can and just go in and cut everything off. And then, yeah, I mean, you don't want to cut down like this. But you want to go to the top, as close to the top as possible, and just hedge clip it. Pretending you're hedging it like a U. Like a hedge clip a U, but you want to take all the foliage off. It's not going to hurt it. Then you go in there and refine the smaller branches to fit what you need. Can everybody hear me? So that's what I do. I don't, everybody's like, when they come to my classes, they'll sit here and go, okay, I'm going to cut this one. I'm going to cut this one. No. Just cut them all off. And be quick about it. And then once you get them all cut off, then you can go in there and start defining what branches you're going to keep, what branches you're going to remove, and so forth. The other thing is, azaleas in the fall, I get a lot of phone calls about this. They come in and they tell me that all the leaves on the back of the trees are falling off. They do shed leaves from last year's growth. So all the current leaf growth this year will stay. The leaves behind it will fall off. And in the winter, as it gets colder, the leaves will curl downward. They'll become a bronzy red color, which is typical. Like with the junipers, they'll turn that bronzy red color for the fall and winter. Satsuki Azalea does the same thing. They'll change color for the winter. So a lot of people get concerned about it. That's just what they like. As far as overwatering these trees, where you should keep them, how you should keep them, I suggest people that they keep them above freezing as much as possible. They can freeze to about 25, 28, but not much below that. That's my personal take on it. I like to keep them on a little warmer side. They don't like prolonged super freezes. For proper flowering, yes, or you'll screw up the cycle. That cycle will definitely get screwed up. These guys right now, once in the morning, once at night. With the heat that we've had, they like a lot of moisture. They do not like to dry out. I like them to be a little bit on the dry side when I'm bending. And I don't mean like bone dry. I mean, I won't water in the morning because then they become even more brittle because they're carrying all the fluid to the branches. That way I can wire the tree much easier. What, on the branches? So, when I bring them in from Japan, just let me start from the beginning there. So, when I bring them in from Japan, they go into a greenhouse. And what we did at the greenhouse that they were in, I have the thing, it's called it's an atomizer with a fan. It increases the humidity level in the greenhouse to about 75%, which when you walk into the greenhouse, it's like a fog. You want to keep the high humidity on them and let the roots grow back in. So all 100 of them were put in there, and that atomizer was put on. Until you start seeing active growth, then I bring them out of the greenhouse and I put them in morning sun, afternoon shade. So there's two places that you could put them as far as placement for growing. If you're growing the tree because you want the final foliage to be small and compact and tight, you want them in full sun. Because in the shade, they will elongate. They will grow out a lot. So a tree like this can go, I would say, morning sun, afternoon shade. It's still young. So even out here in the full sun, you probably, how much sun do you get out there, Andy? Okay. So I would do morning sun, 6 to 8 hours, afternoon shade. And then as the tree develops more and the foliage and the branches become refined, you'll get better ramification and tighter growth. So as I said to you before, I'm going to try to find a branch on this tree to cut off a small branch. So on an azalea like this, if you look at this, can you see the branch? So on this branch here, if you look right here in the center, that was probably that's 2 years ago flower bud. That was a flower bud. Okay? What happened was that flower bud was broken off and this branched out. Okay? It was cut this spring, or late winter, early spring, to reduce the foliage mass when it was shipped here. If I go in here now, and if this was right during flowering and I cut this back like that, new buds will develop all down this branch and all down that branch. No problem. Not a problem at all. If I put it in shade, the growth will become elongated. If I put it in sun, the growth will become shorter. That's what you want for show. If you're growing the tree out because it's still young and you want certain areas to thicken, that's why I'm saying more shade. So it depends on the tree and depends on the situation. If you have one branch that you want to grow out and make it thicker, put it in more shade. So you can put it in all shade. It will grow in all shade. The leaves will get larger and the branches will develop much faster with longer growth on them. But anytime you cut like this, it multiples not by 2, 6, 8. So then you have to go back in there. It's amazing. Then you have to, sometimes it doesn't bud out here and it buds crazy out of here, then you have to come back in here and cut it to there. So every 1/4 of an inch to every 1/8 of an inch, there's a dormant bud. There's dormant buds all over it. So we could cut all these branches off and restart this tree again, if you wanted to. We're not going to do that today. because that would make the demo really fast. Yeah. So that's one of the things that a lot of people don't know about Satsuki Azaleas. That's why it was very popular in Japan. It's not as popular now. They're still there, but it's not as popular. So every 1/4 of an inch to an 1/8 of an inch, there will be a dormant bud. They're alternating. So there's not side by side, but they're alternate. So there's a bud on this side, bud on that side, and so forth. So those are the things you have to remember as you're setting the branches and putting the branches in place, that you do the right thing. That answered your question, right? Anybody have any other questions? Okay.
What are the differences in care between this style of azalea and a regular garden variety that I take out of my neighbor's yard?
So let me go back to the beginning. Satsuki Azalea, this is something I didn't translate for you. Satsuki means 6th month. Translated. Doesn't mean azalea. It means it blooms in the 6th month. The difference between the garden azalea that you have, which could be kurume, or some cross that some hybridizers taking tons of plants and they've crossed an azalea with, our azaleas here usually bloom end of April, beginning of May. Then your Satsuki's will bloom. The 3 or 4 types of Satsukis that you will see here in the States that are Satsuki that are used in garden are Gumpo, Chinsan, and the last one is Robin Hill. That's a cross, but Robin Hill is very close to Satsuki Azalea. They're used as garden trees, and they won't bloom until June. And the nice thing about Satsuki Azalea, they'll start blooming in June, July, beginning of August. They'll still have flower buds on them. And then they're done. So that's the difference between a garden azalea. The technique is all the same. Depending on the type of azalea it is, because this is Rhododendron indicum. That's Rhododendron, now you're making me think. Cusianum, correct? Oh, there he is. Cusianum. So the growth on that is very similar to this. Just to give you, for instance, so in Japan, the big industry of Satsuki is not the bonsai end of it, it's the flowers. There's a book put out every year that's this thick. And that book contains flowers that they produce over the past 200 years. And the last 3 pages are flowers that they've added. So what they'll do is they'll take this flower and they'll cross it with this flower. They'll let the seed develop on the tree. They'll harvest the seed. They'll sow the seed. 7 to 8 years later, they may get a flower on it. And then they select the flower or they throw them all out. Yeah, so, and the best flower that is chosen by the Satsuki Guild will go into that book. The best structure, the best color, the best endurance. There's a lot of work and a lot of time just put into the garden flower end of it. If you ever get to go to Japan, if you go in end of May, beginning of June, they bloom a little earlier there because of the weather. You can go to the Satsuki show and you can see all these flowers in bloom. And they're always working on new varieties. Always working on new varieties. Anybody have any questions?
What is your spray schedule for preventive spraying?
Preventative. So I like to use systemics. So if I know certain types of year that thrips are going to be here, and thrips like to be here at this time of year. So the product that I am using right now is Bare 3-in-1. I like it. I don't like using malathion. If I have to, I will. But for the most part, I stay away. So in the spring, I'll start in the winter. So in the winter time, these weren't done yet, but in the winter time, last year I started some of them. This year I'm going to do them all. And Bruce is going to hate me. Bruce is in the back there. I'm going to spray all my trees with lime sulfur. There's a lot of fungus issues with trees, tip lights, not just azaleas, everything. So what I will do is I will cover all my pots with newspaper and or plastic. And the reason for that is this lime sulfur will stain the pots. It will stain any pore surface that you get the lime sulfur on. So you do not want that to happen. And I'm going to spray all my trees with lime sulfur. So that's what I'll do in the fall. I'll do that twice. In the spring, I'll do a fungicide. So my schedule in the spring, I'll follow through for azaleas only on this one. On azaleas in the spring, I'll do 2 fungicides. I'll do, I have Captain left. You can't buy Captain anymore. You could use Daconil, and the other product I use is Clearies, 3336. I do that twice. Then I do a systemic. The systemic I use, and the reason I use that is usually around mid-June, July, you'll start having problems with lacewing. So when I know that time is coming, I'll spray it with a systemic, and that product is Bayer 3-in-1. And the nice thing about Bayer 3-in-1 is a lot of people realize insecticide and a miticide are 2 different things. If you have mites, an insecticide will not touch mites. Mites will just think it's soap for their own pits. It won't kill them. You can dump the nastiest stuff on there. If you don't use a miticide on a mite, it won't kill it. The nice thing about Bayer 3-in-1, it covers all of them. It has a fungicide into it, but that's the least of the worries. So that Bayer 3-in-1 will kill the lacewing preventatively because it's systemic. It stays in the system for 14 days. The other product that you could use, and I use this, I don't know who uses it here, is 12-month tree care by Bayer. And that's a systemic that stays in the tree for 12 months. Does anybody here use that? Okay. I really like that. That's a very good product. It's what they're using on emerald ash borer now. They're also using it on the spotted lanternfly. It takes approximately a month for it to uptake into the tree and become fluid inside the tree. So what happens is when that insect bites that branch or chews that leaf or whatever the case may be, that insect will die from it. So that is all my trees get doused with that in the spring. I do water that all with my trees in the spring. And then after that, I'll do spot sprays for lacewing, which usually the 12-month care will take care of that. But the 12-month care will not take care of mites. So you really have to do the miticide on that. And that's why I use the Bayer 3-in-1. That's a very good product. Usually, that could be it, but that could be also mites, discoloration. Yeah, that could be a mite problem. That you missed the boat on that one. So what the damage is done. So it's not going to kill the tree. But what I'm saying is, you missed the boat because if you spray right before you think it's happened. So when did this happen? When did the leaves? So that's why I do a spring spray. So you knock things down. Funguses you'll never get totally rid of. You'll maintain. And that's why I'll use multiple different types of fungicides. As far as insecticides, they do become resistant, but I find that I use the Bayer 3-in-1. I've used something a little bit different last year, and I try to change it around a little bit just to tick them off and really kill them off. But I'm a firm believer in lime sulfur. When I was in Japan, I didn't do it when I came back because it's too much. It's a large undertaking. You got to cover all the pots and you got to spray them. But one thing people don't realize, lime sulfur in this country, the only thing we use it for is painting the dead wood. In Japan, we used to spray everything with lime sulfur. We never had the fungus problems. It's a natural product. What they do is they take lime and they take sulfur and they boil it to a certain temperature. And then when you spray it on the tree, the high alkaline and the low pH, either nothing can live on it, either way, high pH or low pH, and everything dies off or just goes away. So that's important that you do something like that. That's why I believe in lime sulfur, because a lot of the fungicides are becoming immune to the problems that we're having today. Anybody have any other questions? Sorry about that.
Why are you doing the wiring on your own?
I'm going to wire all the branches of this tree. And the reason I'm wiring all the branches, I want all the branches to be moved into one position. So a lot of these branches here need to come down. And actually that branch is going to be wired down or pulled down. And I want to place all the branches so that all the branches, if you look at this tree, as I said, came out of the ground and they were just cut, but there's a lot of branches that are going straight up. Some of these branches in here need to be carefully wired down so that pads are developed and the new pads can be developed on the tree. And if you come up here and look later, you can see where it's been cut and new buds have developed on smaller branching. Okay? So I'm wiring all the branches to move them into position. Any of the branches that have suckered out onto the trunk need to be removed so you can see most of the nice movement of the tree. And when you bend azaleas, since you're using aluminum, always go oversized. And the reason you want to go oversized is that so you can bend them without breaking them. You use undersized wire, you will break them. Because I just bent a decent branch there and I didn't crack it yet. I'm getting there. Okay.
When you wire this time of year, how long does it take for the set?
So if I do this now, I will say by, on this tree, end of May, beginning of June, they'll set, they'll harden off, and they'll stay where they are. They will definitely stay where they are. Without a problem. So I'm wiring some smaller branches here for future development of the branching. And that's what I'm using the fine wire for. But once this wiring is done, you will not have to wire it again. It will all be clip and grow, as my teacher would say, clip and grow. Again, anytime you make a cut, these are my two favorite tools. I wish Kika would make these, or this style. This is a tool that I've had since 1989. It's made by Masakuni, so it is expensive, I know that. And my teacher's the one that told me to buy it because, number one, with most concave scissors, you know how concave is, right? When you cut, the tip's gonna push out. This will make a nice small flush cut on a small branch. If you're cutting something large, especially azaleas, if you cut, and the wood on azaleas is very dense, if I were to cut this branch here with this pair of scissors, which is about the width of the teeth, it's very possible this will break. If I use this one here, which if you look at the top of the tool, it's flat. So when it goes together, it makes a clean cut, but it will not break the tool. It makes a nice clean cut where I can remove excess branches without any problem. It's a knob cutter. I'm sorry, this is the point where I have to really think so I don't break anything. Again, with azaleas, I like to make a nice clean cut so there's no knobs on there. And then when I seal it, that it recovers nicely. So here, you can see this branch is much better defined as a branch. This wasn't cut back as hard, okay? This branch here was cut back much harder, probably because it was longer, whatever the case may be. So it was cut back to bare wood. So all the new growth that I've wired here at the tip is all new branching for the future. So all these new tips will develop new branches. So what will happen is, we'll take this tree, we'll let it grow for the rest of the year if it puts any more growth on, and then next spring, after it flowers, we'll go in there and do selection of the branching to develop tertiary branching and further ramification of the tree. So with that being said, all the branches will become, this branch will become a little larger in size. It's not there yet, but again, it's still young. So I'm just gonna go around this tree and see what every other thing I need. So this branch here has a double branch. There's two branches, one branch on top and one branch on the bottom. I don't like it, so one of the branches are gonna come off. And it's gonna be this branch here. If anybody wants it, it will root. Stick it in perlite, put it in a plastic bag, you'll have roots by spring.
So you said that was top and bottom. Why did you choose the one you chose?
The one on the top has better branches. This one's very straight. So if I wanted to use this one, I would have to cut it back into here and let that all bud back. So that'd be a cheap way of doing it, so I wouldn't have to wire anything. So, I mean, I could have done that, but now I can wire this branch down and fill in that void there. But as you can see, this was cut here in the spring. The top was flush cut. I don't know if the camera can see it, but this was flush cut here in the spring. All that's new growth. That's all new growth. So anytime you cut them, they develop multiple branches on the tree. So far, so good. You heard that? I don't need that branch anyway. Because when I was in Japan, my teacher would sit there and watch me wire azaleas. And he'd see me break, he goes, bad. So when he broke them, he says, don't need that branch anyway. So I don't know if the camera can see this, but if you look here, this branch was bare in the spring, late winter. This was cut off, and these are the two new branches that come out, okay? So, and you can see it's about a 1/4 inch apart from where the buds broke from it. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna wire these two, and then next spring, you're gonna cut those two tips off, and you're gonna multiply by 2 on everything. And as long as they get enough nutrients and enough light, there'll be multiple buds coming out of that one spot as the vigor increases. And that vigor is increasing because we're fertilizing it heavily to do so. And I'm wiring everything on the tree so that the movement of the branches is all set for the future. Again, the other thing is any small dead branches or unsightly knobs that were left in Japan, I'm cutting off. And then when I'm done, after I'm done wiring, I won't do it now because the sealant will get all over me. It will get all over the tools. At which point, I will go ahead and seal all the cuts so that they would heal properly. There's several different types. So there's Kino, which I believe Andy sells. It's the green white tube. That works well. There's another one called Bonsai Bond, Satsuki Bond. Any of the liquid types will work. In Japan, we used to use, and I know he has this. This is Kino. Yeah, I just brought my Kino today. The other product is Top Gin, which is orange. And a lot of people don't like using that, but it has a fungicide in it. And because that fungicide's in there, it prevents any problems. But Top Gin is very good. And it comes in an orange form and a blue form. We used to buy big 5-gallon or 1-gallon buckets of it because we would use a lot. We just take a paintbrush and paint it on. It works very well, and it's water soluble. So unlike Kino, you get it on your fingers, you gotta rub it off like gum. It's very easy to use with a paintbrush and very easy to clean up. I'm sorry that I'm quiet, but when I'm trying to focus so I don't break anything. Does anybody have any questions? Just ask them. So I guess everybody, doesn't have to be Satsuki related, it could be any other bonsai related question. So the process for azaleas being brought into this country. So what happens is the American government decided that for whatever reason they were going to target bonsai people. This is the reason why you have invasive insects in this country. And it's not. So what they did was years ago when I wanted to bring a bonsai into this country, as long as it was one of the plants specified on the list that I could bring in, as long as I had it bare rooted and it was cleared by customs in Japan, and what I mean by cleared by customs in Japan is I would take it to an agricultural center, they inspect the plant, and they take this big red chop, Japanese chop with the Chinese character, and they whack it on the box. Once Americans saw that, they said, good, you were good to go. Now the process is, two things have to happen. Either it has to be quarantined here in this country for 3 years, or it has to be quarantined in Japan for 3 years. It's a joke. Because you go to Japan, and I'm not going to say who, I'm not going to say where. You go to the nursery, and the quarantine greenhouses are wide open. It's supposed to be double door. They're wide open. See butterflies in there. But I don't say anything because I don't want any problems. The Japanese government, as long as the doors are closed when they show up, they don't care. They can't monitor everything. My point is the Japanese are too worried about their trees to allow an insect into this country. They are very thorough on inspection. What makes me mad about this country, I don't know if anybody works here in the government, but anyway, when I pick my trees up at JFK, which is where I have to pick them up, all trees that come into this country have to go through JFK and be cleared at JFK because it's the only place that has aphis. And that's the place where they do the inspection. So I was there this late winter. I went inside to the building. The trees just showed up. They opened 2 boxes. They didn't pull a tree out. They didn't look at a tree. They said, oh, it has green leaves. It's Satsuki Azaleas. They make sure all the paperwork was in place, and they went through. It's paperwork. And what bothers me about that, I would feel much better if they were to inspect the trees, but they don't. All they worry about is paperwork. So right now, I have 1 greenhouse up. I am bringing probably 60 to 75 Japanese white pines this spring, another 100 azaleas this spring, and then my new I put 1 greenhouse up on my property already. The 1 greenhouse is 30 by 72 foot long. The next greenhouse goes up will be, I think it's 25 by 40, somewhere around that. That greenhouse will be a quarantine greenhouse. And what the quarantine greenhouse means, it has a certain size of mesh that covers the entire greenhouse. So no pesky insects can leave. I will have to have a double door entry. I will be only the people that work there are allowed in there. And they have to stay in there for 3 years. And that's the new rule. It used to be that you could bring in anything as long as it was on the list. As long as it was on the list, you could bring it in. The National Arboretum has to do it. Everybody has to do it. It's not just me. Everybody has to do it. That's the new law in place. They said that's the only way to monitor disease coming into this country. So that's the process I have to do. So I prefer to have them quarantined there because it's less of a job here. But as soon as they land here, they're clear. I can send them or ship them anywhere because they've been cleared by customs and cleared by EFIS.
Is that 3-year quarantine applied to everything like stone, anything that's inanimate? That quarantine, like for example, the spot lantern plant came in here.
That came in from China.
Yeah, and it's dried somehow.
It was on a pallet.
Yeah, I'm saying, does everything have to go through like a 3-year quarantine, or is it a certain?
That's only plants.
Only plants, so.
Yeah. They're not going to stop anything coming in from China. There's too much of a large industry there. So all plant material is 3-year quarantine. Now, I'm not saying everything. I'm going to say everything bonsai related. And the reason I say that, if it's a small cutting or small plants for like nursery stock, and it's grown in a greenhouse that's under, strict supervision, they may let that pass through. And the reason they may let that pass through is because there's not a lot of rootstock. They can check for insect, they can check for fungus just by looking at tissue culture. They can look at that and make sure it's clean before it's shipped.
Quarantine sites here in the US aren't run by the government?
Well, let's put it this way. They're inspected by the government. So what that means is they show up when they want to, if they want to. Like I'm a licensed nursery. I had someone show up at the house and my wife's like, the government's here, what do I do? I said, let them in. Let them do what they want. Do not stop this, just let them go. So they go up there and they say, well, we see you had this. I said, yeah, I sprayed for that shit. And they said, well, you're in a quarantine zone for lanternfly. I said, yeah, and it didn't come from one of my plants. It came from a pallet. the source is 20 minutes from my house in Berks County. A gentleman brought in marble from China, and the 8 casings were already on the pallet. And what they had done is, I guess they had stayed there and lived there long enough that they could regenerate themselves and build a large enough colony that they just started spreading. Now, the funny thing is, I have not seen one lanternfly at my house this year. Not one. So, with that being said, I've been very lucky not having to deal with them. Now, last year was a different story. They were everywhere. They were everywhere. I'm sure there's lanternfly up here. Is there? No? Yeah? Okay. Does anybody have any questions as I'm working on this?
Do you have to have any special consideration when you wire the top because it's not as strong as the bottom?
This is young enough yet, so I think it will be okay. But the consideration would be, so let me back up. So when I do pruning, this is something I forgot to mention. So when I do my severe pruning during the flowering season, if the top of the tree is weak, I do not cut much or if at all. If improperly, buyer beware. This gentleman went to Walmart and bought a bag. It was like $10.99, $11.99, all-purpose fertilizer. And all this all-purpose fertilizer is either cow manure, chicken manure, horse manure, whatever. And then they add other chemical components to it to make it the proper stabilized NPK. But what they don't do is they ferment it. What I mean by ferment it, they don't ferment it so that the tree so it's safe for the tree to be used. Well, he piled this around the trees and it killed them all, burned them all. The acid's dumped in the soil. I mean, I have azaleas that were this big, that tall, dead. So buy quality brand fertilizer. Buy from Andy. Don't buy junk. Don't buy something that you don't know. And if you're unsure of it, please, what's that? Please test it on a tree that you don't care about, and then see if you can use it again somewhere else. Okay? So we were trying to save them by soaking them in water, all types of things, trying to save the trees, but they were too far gone. It doesn't take long. What happens is when I had talked about my fertilizer mix that I make, when that fertilizer mix is not properly fermented, the salts in the fertilizer will destroy the roots, and that's what happened. It turned black and died back to nothing. Yeah, I alternate that. So if I am going to cut it back hard this year, I know that I have to repot next year. I don't do both at the same time. So I repot now, or I prune hard now, one or the other. I don't do both at the same time. That's important. You can, it depends on where you keep it. My trees stay in a greenhouse that stays about 33, 34 degrees all winter. So they'll, and it gets colder than that because my heater doesn't always keep up. So it may go down to 28, maybe even 25. I like to see them, if you're digging, you're talking about pre-established bonsai or stuff that you're digging out of the ground? Pre-established, you can do it now as long as you don't root prune it too hard. If you root prune really hard, I wouldn't suggest now, but if you're kind of just repotting and slipping into another pot, that's okay. I would not do a heavy root pruning at this time of year, but a light root potting is okay. I put in tea bags, paper tea bags. The reason, go ahead. So every 30 days I replace it. So it's about a tablespoon per bag. So I fill that tablespoon per bag, and every 30 days I replace it.
Spike it in so the squirrels don't steal it.
Yes. Yeah. We put aluminum wire spikes, old piece of wire that you have kicking around, and just make a little spike. The reason I do that is so the squirrels don't come and take it away. Probably more like raccoons than squirrels, but. And then if that doesn't work, there's always either lead poisoning or cages. I knew that was going to crack. But it's in the position I want it now. Different styling options. So what do most of the trees look like? And why I say that is everybody knows azaleas are not a true tree. So the design is based off of pines that are seen in nature or very exotic designs. So where maples, pines, junipers are all designed differently, same technique, but the shape and artistic design is different because they're trying to portray a tree from its natural place. Azaleas do not have that because they're a bush. So, you know, they're basically based after pines. So that's where the design comes from. Flowing, good flowing movement, things of that nature. Again, anything that's coming off the trunk that's small needs to be removed. I cut all the dead knobs off the tree that were not cleaned up in Japan. Again, their most important thing is to get them bare rooted and brought to this country safely. So they're not thinking about cleaning off the twigs and branches. Nice good clean cuts so that they heal properly.
What's the front of the tree?
I will turn it for you in a second. Let me get this last piece of wire on. So the front of the tree was, this tree was actually potted properly. So that's going to be the front of the tree like that. Okay? So everybody can see it now. You can see the branches are starting to fill in. So this branch will be here. This will be a little bit farther out. This branch will be a little bit further out. So it's stepped and staggered. What? Longer, shorter, and then the round top. It grew fairly well. Put about 2 inches of growth on a year, which is about what most of the azaleas will do. But what I'm doing now is I'm pulling all out. The great thing about Satsuki Azaleas is once you get them wired to this point and they start to bud back, you'll develop padded foliage and good ramification within 2 years to a finished displayable tree because they're that easy to grow and to get the ramification done. So it's just getting the size of the trunk that takes forever. But because they multiply in branching very quickly, it works very well for ramification without a problem. Yeah, I hear a dog barking, but I don't know what that's supposed to mean. Huh? Feed the brisket. And there's still some flower buds tips on here. The dog was barking.
Yeah, I'm taking them off.
Okay. No more sitting. I gotta stand and do this.
Sorry, just on a picture. Interrupt your wiring technique there.
And whenever's a good time, about 10 minutes or so, 5-10 minutes, whenever we stop.
Okay, sure. Let's see. So my studying began with Chase Rose at Rose Bonsai Studio in New Hope. Did the whole thing, Karate Kid. Saw that. I actually saw it at the Philadelphia Flower Show, and that's where I met him for the first time. I took a few classes, and within a year, I had more trees in my backyard than the local nursery did, because I just kept on buying. I had to have one of everything. Didn't matter what it was, I had to have one of everything. It wasn't good, it was horrible. So, it was horrible. You know what I'm talking about. You had to have everything. You go through that phase where you have to have ones a week show. You don't care where it came from. You don't care what the quality is. You have to have one. So then the opportunity came up. I was either going to go to Del Valle College, which is in my hometown, for horticulture, or my other opportunity was to go to Japan and study. And my teacher was very good friends with my host, which was Susumu Sudo, and his wife, Sechio Sudo. So we sent, basically what we did, we sent letters over in 1988 saying that, we have a person that wants to apprentice in Japan and want to know if anybody that you knew was doing apprentices, and in the hopes that they would say, yeah, we'll take them. And that's what happened. So how did I get ready for it? I didn't get ready for it. They wanted me to learn the language, but in the time that they said yes to the time that I landed there was about 3 months. So I was fully immersed. I had a Japanese English teacher 3 days a week. It was a shock. It was a culture shock, that's for sure. I'd do it again though. When I get married with my wife, I tell her I'm going back to Japan. I'm done. I loved it there. I truly loved it.
Bobby, you were one of the first to go over as an apprentice program in the state, weren't you?
No. I don't know if I was the first.
You were among the first.
Let's see. Before me, Marty Schmallenberg went to Yamaji's, correct? Marty was at Yamaji's, which is down south. Kathy Shaner and I were both there at the same time. She was down in, I forget the name of that town. She was with Mitsuya. So her and I were there at the same time. Full-time apprentices, yes. I was probably one of the first, and so was Kathy. There had been French people there before me, so they may have beat us to it, but I was pretty close to some of the first that went over. I never thought about it that way, though. That just dates me on how old I am. Okay, we're getting closer to being done. But if the 10 minutes is up and he wants us to eat, I won't hold him back, and then we'll come back and finish it up. Was trying to finish before 12, but that may not happen. I could probably skip lunch. So the apex, I'm not going to do much wiring on, not for health reasons or anything other than that. But you want the apex to start at the top and splay down like this. So certain branches at the top, I will wire just to fill in the voids. But for the most part, I like rounded tops on my trees. So when I was taught raised bonsai by Chaser Zabe, I was always taught pointed tops. I'd come back from Japan, and I was used to rounded top trees. So we had big fights. Big fights. No, it's got to go this way. No, you're wrong. I said, no, I'm not wrong. It's got to go this way. We still have arguments about it. Okay. So I am done with the wiring. A few of the branches at the top could be wired, but I don't think they're necessarily need to be wired right now. I'll show you the front of the tree and what I've done. I've either made it better or worse. I think in this case I made it better. So that's the front of the tree. Okay. For here on out, you're going to develop the pads throughout. And as I said, within a couple years, you'll have total pad, you're filling the pads. Now there's some areas in here that need to be cut back and branches further back in need to develop. But again, it's still a young tree, it's a pre-bonsai, it's not a finished bonsai. But this is what we do. You wire it most likely twice and that's it. Trust me, you don't want to be wiring Satsuki Azaleas all the time. If you're wiring Satsuki Azaleas all the time, you're going to be breaking a lot of branches, you're going to be aggravated, you're going to get out of bonsai. So wire them hard the first time, second time, let them set the branches, and then from there on out, cut them back. Okay? Okay, so this is part 2. Another Satsuki Azalea. This tree has much better ramification than the last tree. We are still going to define more of the branches and cut some of the areas off that are not needed. This is an exposed root style azalea. Just to explain to you guys how this is done, does anybody know how this is done? Okay, so what happens is they take a cutting, they develop the top of the tree, which is, in this case, is only from about above my hand up. They wire and shape the tree into a design. They wire the branches, they put it in a pot, and they grow it. Then they take it out of the pot, and they have these plastic tubes. They stick them in there, and they plant them in the ground. And in this case, the plastic tube is probably 8 to 10 inches in diameter. The larger ones, I was told, are between 30 and 35 years old. It takes them that long to get to this. It takes them 5 years to expose all the roots. What they'll do is they'll go in there with a knife. It's a plastic. It's not too thick, but it's a plastic. And they'll go in and remove some of it, take some soil out, because not only is there going to be major heavy-duty woody roots, there's going to be fibrous roots. So they do it slowly, not to distress the tree too much. So they work from the top at the base of the trunk, and they work their way down until all this is exposed, until it becomes woody. Okay? And it takes, on this size, probably 30. They're all probably in that same range, 30 to 35 years old. Somewhere around there. So that's how they get it to become an exposed root stock. Now, this tree was planted the proper angle. And you can't really screw it up because it's in a round pot. So that is a good thing. I'm not a fan of this pot, but that's not a problem.
Can we find a pot for it then?
Yeah. Do you want me to pot it? You want to pot it? We can pot it. All right. So if you find a pot, we'll put it in the pot.
You find a pot.
Oh God. Okay.
I only have 2 azaleas, so I'm not, most of my pots are not late.
It probably would do. All right. Let's get it worked on, and then we'll see if we have a pot for it. If we do have a pot for it, we will pot it up. You have a lot of Sararinas. I'm going to say maybe a Sararina pot. Sararina. Yeah. So anyway, if you were to come up and look at this tree has much better ramification than the last tree I worked on. So this is closer to being a completed tree. Again, this tree hasn't been pruned much this year, just to anticipate the stress it went under to be bare rooted and shipped to the country. And what I suggest with people with trees like this, when they overwinter them, you take several layers of burlap and you wrap this part of the trunk in the wintertime. Because even though it's exposed and woody now, like a normal trunk is, this is still very delicate. So what I would do is I would take burlap, plastic, grandma's old blanket that you don't want anymore, and wrap it all around the whole trunk just to give it extra protection. Because this is still a functioning root system. It's just above ground exposure. Bubble wrap will work. Yeah, would add better insulation. Yep, that would work too. That would work too. This is not the right tag for this tree. What am I doing? This is not Hinonamara. This variety has a Hikari Natsuki. Hikari Natsuki has a fluted flower. I don't have a picture of it, or else I'll show you a picture. So the flower is fluted, long petioles, and they're deep. It's deep-throated in the middle, and they can be either white, pink, sometimes a reddish color. Very pretty flower, very different. One of the more prized azaleas that I like, that I enjoy. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and wire this one as well, and shape this one. And if he has the right pot here, we're going to pot it up. I don't know if he has the right pot now, but we'll do it. Okay. So, purple. Glazed. If you have it, take a look around. If you don't have it, we always can pot it later. So again, with this tree, you want to make sure that in the wintertime, you give it a little bit extra protection, which is important.
What kind of pot would be good for that?
Not taller. Any of these I would never put in a shallow pot. Everybody that gets these, if you're going to show it, you want to put it in a shallower round pot or an oval pot, that's fine. But I would suggest a pot that's probably 4 to 5 inches tall. They like it deep. All azaleas like deep roots. And because they like deep roots, it works out that way. So we're gonna wire these branches down and fill them in so you can see the branches defined more. But to answer your question, glazed, unglazed, it's your preference. But with this, going to have the flowers that are fluted white or pink. Probably a blue or a cream-colored pot would work well. Oval or round would work. Preferably, probably say oval. You have anything about 3 to 4 inches? 8, 10? That might work. You gotta get up there though. It's always the one at the top, Andy. So anyway, we're not going to wire this whole tree. We're going to wire branches to fill in that area and remove branches that are not needed. This was wired once, and it's got good ramification, but we're going to refine it even more. It's a good tree. This is more of a stage of a finished display piece bonsai. Yes?
You talked earlier about defoliating every 2 years. Why? I've never done that before, and I've never heard it before. Why do you do it?
Okay. Every 2 to 3 years, it can be done. It has to be done. This is the reason why. On azaleas, if you look at the tips here, they send out not just 1 or 2 buds, they send out multiple buds in one area. And what happens is, all right, so 1 year you have 3 to 4 buds in one area. The following year, 3 or 4 more buds come out here. Well, those new buds that are going to come out on those tips are going to be smaller and shorter growth. And the reason behind that is there's not enough vascular, since the vascular system on azaleas is very thin, it's very difficult for the fluid to get to the tips. So what happens is if you don't do that process, you have dieback. So if you look at some of your old azaleas, if you have older azaleas like Kurumes, Rhododendron Cusianums, yeah, that's correct. Just making sure I got my Latin right. If you look at some of the older ones that have very fine, delicate ramification, they look great for a couple of years and all of a sudden the branch dies. It's because the vascular system can't pull the moisture there. Excuse me. So when the vascular system can't pull the moisture there, the tree just loses that branch because it's not needed. So that's why it's important that you cut back. And especially on these, you have to cut these back once a year. And then total defoliation every couple of years. Because what happens is, it's not like with a pine that you get, or a maple where you get a branch here, and then you'll have new branches, and you have double, good ramification. The ramification of this just keeps multiplying. So the vascular system becomes so thin that the phloem and the xylem can't get to the tips, and then they just die off. Especially with Cusianum, but that same thing will happen with Satsuki as well. Again, if the top is weak, what I tell people all the time is you leave the top alone. You selectively remove some of the stuff that are not needed. This one is doesn't look like it's weak at all. It looks like it's pushing right through. But it's important. So as I showed you before, this is a desiccated tip of an azalea. So on this tip, it's already broke 2 ways. So on this tip, it could develop 7 to 10 new buds. So you thin them down to 2. So there's your ramification, okay? The following year, it's going to do the same thing. What happens is, as this stem becomes thinner and thinner at the tip, it can't carry that flow there anymore. It can for a year or 2, but at which point, when it can't do that anymore, it dies back. That's why it's important to go back in there and cut them back. It's very, very important. So in Japan, you used to take plastic stakes, because you can't remember what year from next, or what tree was cut back and not. So the year that we cut the foliage back on the tree, I mean totally defoliation, we cut everything off. That would have a stake put in the pot. That means that the following year it would be repotted. Then it would get a different stake, probably a different color if I remember correctly. And the following year it would be defoliated again. So it's on-off cycle. So 1 year it would get a general pruning. The following year it would get a defoliation. And in the middle of that it would get a repot. And if the roots started to look like they were netting together too much and too coarsely, because when this happens on azaleas, because the roots are very fine, water can't enter. When water can't enter, that's when they'll decline as well. So when you have this on the top of the surface, all you're doing is watering the side roots, you're not watering the core. So that's when we would bare root and remove all those fine roots so that the water could get into the tree. Okay? So that's the important part of doing that, cutting them back.
So when you bare root, how much is it?
It's enough to allow the air and the water getting into the top. Well, first I would do it dry, remove it with chopsticks, and clean it all out, and then I would go in with water and then clean it out. I wouldn't bare root it to the point where it came from Japan bare root, but I would bare root it heavily enough that you would remove a lot of the finer netted roots in there. Because if you don't, you'll have a problem. You'll definitely have a problem. So in Japan, so again, it may be less here, but I still would do it every other year, defoliation. Or at least a partial. Especially on Satsuki.
Did your nursery in Japan, did it specialize in azalea?
At one point in time, they did. But what happened is that the Yakuza, the Japanese mob, was very interested in Satsuki Azaleas. And because of that, my teacher didn't want to be involved with that, so he got out of it.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Still to this day, if I've been at bonsai nurseries in Japan and they're there looking to buy, it's not uncommon. Especially with this Satsuki Azalea. So my boss didn't want to have to deal with that, so he decided. Now he still had azaleas for other clients that were not Yakuza based, but if he knew that they had any relations with the Yakuza, he didn't want to be bothered with that. Yakuza? Japanese have a lot of money, so Yakuza is just bad money. It's still a problem over there.
Do you have a favorite variety of azalea?
My favorite variety, I do. I like Nihozan, which is like a salmon colored flower. And I like Kozan. Kozan's a light pink.
K-O?
Kozan. And Nihozan is the same thing as Kozan. Nihozan and Kozan are in the same family. They were derived from the same plant. One has a salmon pinkish throat, and the other one has a very light pink flower. Small flower though, I mean the flowers are only that big. They're just very, if I had a choice of a tree, that's the type of tree I would want.
Are you familiar with Kazan?
Yes.
That's my.
Yeah, Kazan's the, that has the curled leaf, doesn't it?
No.
Pink flower.
It has a salmon.
Pink.
Salmon color. So salmon is a salmon orange flower.
Okay, I'm thinking of, but it has a dark green leaf, triangular?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. I'm confusing, because that's from Ozakazuki. So that variety was developed from Ozakazuki. So I have Ozakazukis over there. So Ozakazuki and that, it was crossed with another plant to get Keiza. Yeah.
The two that you mentioned that are your favorites, are they your favorites because of the flower?
Because of the flower and the flower size. The new one that came out that I had up here that I worked on before, that one is Hinomura.
Yeah.
That, I don't know if that's a derivative of, I don't think so. Because Nihozan and Kozan have a very thin strap leaf like this. If I see Nihozan or Kozan, I can usually pick it out by the leaf because I know the leaf. Hinonomora, the flower is about the same in shape. You have one like this? So Hinonomora, small flower about this big around, and Kozan's about that same size, and Nihozan. I like the flower, I like the leaf shape. And for the most part, that was a very popular one used during that era. I'm not a fan of Kaho. Flowers are like that. And we were talking about insects before. The biggest problem with thrips is you never know when they're going to show up. So that's why I like using a systemic. And in Japan, they did the same thing. They used to use a granular systemic. And when you use a granular systemic, you shouldn't have that problem.
And which granular system is
None here. You can't buy it. I can't buy it unless you have a license. It's a licensed product.
So can you buy, I mean,
So there is systemics that you can use. The one that I had mentioned before is, it's called Bear 12-month tree control. It's a systemic that goes through the tree and it lasts in the tree for 12 months. And it's made by Bear. If you're from Pennsylvania, okay, then you can buy it. If you're in New Jersey, you can't. Or can you? Can you buy Bear tree 12-month tree control? Okay. Okay. Because some states, I know New York, you can't buy it. You can't buy it in New York.
didn't mention whitefly. I had an infestation this year. Whitefly.
I didn't have any white flies this year. So whitefly could be another possibility, but usually I don't have whitefly issues. I either have lacewing or I have, on occasion, I have mites. I did not have any of that other, I didn't have the whitefly issue though. It depends on where they are, and if you have you've had whitefly on them before.
You know, I haven't. This is the first year.
Okay.
But, yeah, I noticed them one day when my Azaleas.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So that's when you get out the spray.
Oh yeah, I knew that. Know it too well.
You said about overwintering.
Excuse me?
You said about overwintering though?
Overwintering this?
Yeah, well, yeah, all the Azaleas.
Sure, no problem. So on Satsuki Azaleas, the overwintering process, what I do is I try to keep them around, I would say no colder than 28 degrees in the winter. So, 28 is the cutoff. 40, 45. If you can keep them at 40, 45 all winter long, they'll be perfectly fine. I know certain people that actually keep them in the house and do okay with it in a dry basement. The problem is it throws their cycles off and they bloom all crazy times of the year. As far as overwintering, who here winters in like a cold frame or a cold greenhouse? Everybody in here. Okay. You winter in a greenhouse like I do. Heated greenhouse. So heated greenhouse with ventilation.
I keep it right between 32 and 35.
Right. And you have exhaust vents and all that. Yep. That's the only way to do it. And what happens is you'll keep it at that level. It doesn't have to be warm, and they do the best. They may push a little earlier in the spring, but that's okay. But that's all I would do in the wintertime. And I don't mind if they get a really hard frost outside before I put them away, because I want them to go dormant. So I'll let them go down to 28 before I put them away. That didn't happen until the beginning of January at my house this year, but it was a crazy fall. So, but once that happens, then I know they're good for the winter. If you're going to keep them outside or keep them in a garage, the biggest thing that you want to do with azaleas or any bonsai is you don't want this. And what I mean by this is you don't want cold nights, hot days. Cold nights, hot days, you're going to kill your tree. A tree will wake up once it gets past 50, 60 degrees. And if it stays there long enough and it goes back down again, you'll kill it over multiple times like that. The tree can't handle that. So when a tree gets warm and it starts waking up, it's like, oh, spring's on its way. And then it goes down to 10, 5 degrees. That's why 2 years ago when we had that really hard frost, a lot of people lost trees because the temperature went up, temperature went down. So the best way to keep them is 32. So the lowest I would go is 28 to 40, keep them in that range. And then that's on azaleas, protected well. And then on this, I would wrap it with plastic bubble wrap, burlap, what else? Trunk itself. If you do it in a greenhouse or an environment where it's going to be heated, you don't have to worry. But if you're growing this outside in like a cold frame or something like that, you got to rub this trunk because this is the life support of the whole tree, and it's not in soil. So I would bubble wrap it and probably put some type of cloth on here just to insulate it. And bubble wrap, I never thought about that, would probably be the best way to do it. Bubble wrap would really work well. Bubble wrap would do it. Yes and no. It's preferably to have sun. But if they're, one of my cold frames is, I think it's either 70 or 75% shade. So that means only 30% light's getting in. And the reason I use that type of greenhouse is, if you use a clear cover greenhouse, if the temperature is 12 degrees outside, you go inside that greenhouse at noon when the sun's out, it can be 70 degrees in there. By that night, it will be that same temperature again. In a shaded, white covered greenhouse, the temperature stays the same because it's keeping the light out. So it may fluctuate a little bit, but not as much. So light is not as important as the temperature. Temperature is more important to me. So if you have an unheated garage or a heated garage that you know is around 40 or 45, you're good. Okay? If it's a heated shed, you can keep it 30 or 40 degrees, that's good. Sun is not that important. Temperature is important, and protection of the tree is more important.
Having said that, I'm wondering if that pertains to a lot of outdoor bonsais, since I've just started my outdoor bonsai collection.
Say that again, I didn't
I'm
hear.
wondering if what you've just said applies to a lot of outdoor bonsais.
It does. It's basically all.
Okay.
So,
I had my first outdoor bonsai this year and I had concerns.
okay,
I was going to put it in a window
okay.
with a western exposure. Is that a good idea?
What is it?
What is it?
A
Yeah.
window well with a western
I mean, what's the
exposure.
plan?
What's the
I don't know
plan?
what's the plan? It's a Japanese red ming that you had wired for me in Lancaster. I remember that particular tree, but I'm just not real sure where to put it. I've got a garage, but
Is it heated?
no.
Okay. How deep's the well into the? It's to the basement, right?
Yeah, it's a daylight basement, so I can see it every day. It's just like half above, it's above ground.
Okay. Whatever you can do to protect it.
I can put it in a garage. I don't need to distract with it.
No, it's all right. You can ask questions.
I just, I'll protect it.
The garage would probably work as long as you don't allow it to fluctuate.
No, it doesn't do anything. The garage is always just cold.
Okay.
So I put it in the garage, right?
As long as you don't open it and leave the door open. And what I mean by that is, I had a client that had a tree and the garage was heated to 35, but one day they left the door open, it was really cold out, and it burned the one side of the tree because it's already, once a tree is used to a temperature, it's fine. But once you start fluctuating temperatures, then the tree can be very susceptible to burn, all types of problems. So make sure that if you put it in that garage, the biggest thing you want to buy is a thermometer, a mini max thermometer. Know what the temperature is in there throughout the winter. If you're getting spikes up into the 60s, that's not a good place for it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? So on this tree, as I said before, I am not wiring every branch. I'm just wiring branches that need to be lowered to fill in that void. Because at this time forward, a lot of these branches will be clip and grow method of Satsuki Azalea. What I mean by that is cutting it back. So anyway, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have Bruce come up here again. He's going to help me repot this. I need to get Kanuma, which I'm sure is kicking around here somewhere. I know, I see it from here. What we're going to do, as soon as I get this wiring done, we're going to clean the top off and we're going to repot it to there. On this one, it's white and pink, I believe. White and pink.
I think that pot's too orange. It's the right size.
It may be too orange, but we can always repot it. And we're just going to slip it today.
Is there any?
Top. So anyway, I did some thinning. I opened the branches out. I layered the branches out so you can see all the branches individually. But from this point forward, it has to be thinned and trimmed to fit. I don't want to cut it back hard. The only way you'll get, is this still green? Okay, that's better. The pads will become more defined next year when you cut them back after flower. They're defined now, but they'll be more defined after you prune them. And that's the only way you're going to get really, really well-defined azalea pads on the tree, all through up the top. So I thinned it out so light can get into it. And what we're going to do now is Bruce is my apprentice. And he's been working with me for what, 2 years? So he's been helping me out for 2 years. He's going to help me repot this. And because this is a root, exposed root, what I want to do to this tree is a little bit different than where you would just bring 2 pieces of wire over. I'm going to use bamboo chopsticks to hold it into the pot. And the reason behind that is you don't have a lot in here to hold it down with. When you pull this out, you're not going to see a lot of great fibrous roots. That's just the way these are. So don't get too scared. It may fool me too. Okay. So what we're going to do now, let's take this moss off so we can possibly reuse it. Put this over here. Put that in the dustpan. Okay. Let's see what the bottom looks like. See how it comes out. Well, weird. Okay. Alright. You just leave that over on the side. Well, it's rooted better than I thought it was going to. But as I said, we're not going to do any root work on this. We're just going to get the wire out if we can. Okay. Here we go. All right. So there's the roots. They have grown in. When this came in before, it was nothing but a ball of roots. So it has grown in, it's healthy. That's a good sign. So, no, just take this, we're going to take it off and put it over there. And I'm just going to, Kanuma. Pneuma.
What size are you gonna use?
We're just gonna use the small, we're not gonna use the coarse. It's not large enough. Alright. We're not gonna need much in there either. Just about an inch. A little bit more. Good.
How quickly does the pneumo break down?
More than 2 years. I don't really think it breaks down that much. Especially the one that Andy's getting is pretty darn hard. I won't even worry about it breaking down. It's good for the tree. I mean, Azalea shouldn't need to be repotted every 2 years anyway. So, that looks a lot better in that pot. All right, so what we're gonna do now, Bruce, we don't need soil. What we're gonna do is you're gonna hold the other side. Has everybody ever used this method before? Okay. So what the method we're going to use now is we're not going to use wire to go through here like we originally did because we did it before because there was no roots. Now there's roots, I want to do less damage to the tree. We'll do less damage to the tree with this. So what I do is I take the tip of a piece of bamboo, and my eyes are getting bad. I got to make sure it's bamboo and not wood. Yeah, that's bamboo. You can tell by bamboo because of the long fibers on the chopstick. And what we're going to do is we're going to take them at an angle about that much, okay? And you're going to take it, hold the tree, and slide it in.
And not wood because wood would rot, is that?
No, wood will crack when it bends. Bamboo will rot too, but by the time it rots, the tree will be rooted in. So we used to do all the bonsais in Japan this way. We never used wire to tie across. So hold that side down. I'm gonna tie it in. Okay, thank you. And I'm gonna spin it this way. And I'm gonna tie this side.
What you just did?
Sure.
What did you just do? Where's that?
So the only way you're going to see it if you come up here. So what I do is I take the chopstick and I stick it in. In this case, it's soft enough, I can just push it through like that. And what happens is you're going through the root ball. And when you go through the root ball like that, what it does is the pressure you're pushing down on it pushes it into the soil, into the pot. Thank you. Now, if I did it right, okay, that's the difference between wiring a tree in a pot and using bamboo to put it in a pot. The strength is way better, it won't blow out. Now, in the 2 years that it will be in the pot, the bamboo will rot off, and then there won't be any wires attaching it. Probably a little longer than 2 years, but in 2 years you're going to be repotting this anyway. So, once it's rooted in, I mean, I wasn't sure what the roots were going to look like when I pulled them out because, I mean, this was spring, but it had totally rooted itself in, which is a totally good thing, so the tree's very healthy. I mean, the tree looks healthy on the top, but just because the tree's healthy on top doesn't mean always the roots look healthy. But this tree was perfectly healthy. I wasn't expecting the pot to be full of soil with roots, but this is much better. So that's secure in. The reason I like doing that method is for aesthetics, so you don't see the wire going crisscross. The reason we did the wire before, there was nothing to tie to. There was no netted roots in there. So by doing this, it's tied in there tight. It won't blow over. Meow Meow won't knock it over when she walks by and brushes her hair over it. Now the raccoon I don't know about, but everything else will be okay. Now we go.
Does this have a name, a style, or name?
What the chopsticks? I just call it the chopstick method.
And you could do that with any.
You can, but in this case, since the root ball was soft enough, I could push it in.
But any kind of tree.
Any kind of tree you can do this to. But what I usually use is a wooden mallet because the root ball is harder, and I don't use chopsticks like this. I actually split bamboo, and I make points on them, and you take a wooden mallet that I got from Japan, and you have to pound them in, because it's that dense that you need to pound it in. But in this case, it's way more secure than trying to fish wire through. You would never get it this tight. Okay, we can put this on.
In 2 years, when you go to do this again, you'd expect to see full roots in that pot?
I would expect to see 90%.
You want a scoop?
I think we'll be okay. Yeah, let me spin it for you. How's that? Good, 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 good. Pull it somewhere right there. Yeah. Good, good, good. Put it over here. Good, good, good. A little bit more. You got a chopstick. You can help me out. You realize you're on film now.
I'm not looking. I'm trying to stay.
Just say it with the limelight? Okay. That's why your back's to the camera. So we didn't do any work to the roots. We just slipped it out, pulled the wires out, and slipped it back in. Do you want sphagnum moss back on it, or do you want regular moss? What do you want? Do you have regular moss out back, or no? I'll just put, Sphagnum's good? Keep the moisture down?
Yeah, some of the crap.
It's right there. We can put that right on top.
Normally I'd say regular moss, but we don't have that much.
I don't have much either, so you're in the same boat. Okay, let me cut this little bit off here so it doesn't stick up. There we go.
I like that. I can do that with my
The only problem with that method, if you have a larger tree, sometimes you need two people to do the work. Because you can't, because when you push it down on one side, the other side's going to lift up. Excuse me? Yeah, you could moss this up. That'd be great. You want to take it over on the side and moss it? Over on that table? Okay. Yes. Take care. Okay, the next one up that we have is a variety called Ozakazuki. Ozakazuki is one of the first Satsuki Azaleas. So I'm going to do a little bit of pruning before I start the wiring on this. The other thing is, I want to let people know this is potted in the pot the wrong way. Yeah, it should be the front's here. But when you have 100 trees and you need to get them in a pot, you just... Health matters. So, yeah, this is not the right front. This is the front. So, even though it's potted this way, it should be like that. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to wire this all down and shape it and give it a design.
As if the front was the front.
This is gonna be the front right there, this corner. So when I'm done, it will be that front, the corner.
How do you determine from?
The movement of the tree, you should be able to see into the main trunk. On this one, you want to see movement of the tree, you want to see the main trunk. If the front is determined to be this front, all the branches are coming at you, you don't want that. You want to see all the branches on either side of the tree. So this should be the front right here because of that.
So you don't want the branches coming at you?
So if you look at the pot straight on the way it is, branches are coming out at you.
Yeah.
If I turn it like that, they're not.
Okay, I got it.
You see the movement in the trunk.
Yeah. I do.
You see the movement? You don't see the movement that way.
I'm just
So that
thinking about my own crummy potting experience this spring.
it's just called time and effort, and just doing it over and over again. But that's your front there. That's not your front. It was just potted wrong because we had to. You want the camera? That's the wrong front. This is the right front.
The thing is, if the tree is healthy, you can always adjust it later on.
You can pull it out and move it around. Yep. I'm good for now. Thank you.
Bob, you're importing these?
Mm-hmm.
What's that process like? What's that process like?
Just have the paperwork.
With the Satsuki, do you need to have quarantine this thing? You know?
It was Satsuki Azaleas. As soon as they have to be quarantined in Japan. And then once they're quarantined in Japan, you can bring them here.
So are you going to Japan and taking them? And then,
No, I'm going to Japan and I'm buying from somebody that already has them potted. Yeah.
that costs more than you importing them here to your quarantine system.
It's cheaper if I were to buy them directly and import and quarantine them here. Yes, it's cheaper that way. So I pay for more of a cost for them quarantining. But the only good thing about that is when they come here, I don't have to do anything. They're free to go. This could be shipped to Miami tomorrow. That's what you pay for. So, and it never used to be that way, but now it is. And they only want to do 2 species because they don't want to get caught up in it. And because there's only 2 species, that's what they want. So, what it comes down to is, yeah. But it was never that way. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, is that as long as the plant was on the allowable list to be imported, I could bring anything in. Now, and they just had to be no quarantining, could come straight in.
We got lanternflies now, so there's a reason.
Yeah, well, the lanternflies had nothing to do with the bonsai, so that's the thing that makes me mad. That came in on a pallet from China, and they didn't catch it.
It was in Berks County, PA?
It's right down the road from my house. Yeah. So, but they're ready to blame the bonsai guy. Yeah. So anyway, we're gonna wire this all out. This is a Satsuki Azalea, as I said before, called Ozakazuki. Of the azaleas, of the shorter ones, this is one of my favorite. Okay, this tree wasn't wired too long ago. I could see some wire marks. I'm going to thin it out a little bit. Since this is not my tree, I'm not worried about flowers. So I'm cutting more.
There's always next year.
It's always 3 years away. To me, flowers not important, structure is.
Can we ask non-related questions?
Sure.
Okay, I have a pomegranate,
Okay.
and I actually got a pomegranate.
Okay.
And I was told that if you cut it, you won't get flowers. So 1 year, I was told 1 year is for cutting style, the next year it's gonna have the flowers. Is that the way it goes, basically?
What kind of pomegranate? Is it the dwarf one or the full size one?
The kind you get from when somebody sends you one from FT Flowers.
I don't know.
I got it in my car. It was a bonsai from the florist.
Okay. I don't know. There's two forms. There's the dwarf form of azaleas, and there is a straight species that has the larger leaf. No. No. But if it's a dwarf pomegranate, it will bloom all the time. So I'm guessing it's not a dwarf pomegranate.
What was blooming? I was told it only bloomed once, and it bloomed all summer long.
Little blooms. That's dwarf pomegranate. That's what you have. Yep, they'll do that. Yep. And it will bloom, that species will bloom all the time.
Okay, so even if I cut it,
Next year it should still keep blooming. Because it blooms on new growth. I think if it was a full-size pomegranate, that may be the case. I don't think you'll have a problem with dwarf pomegranate. They'll bloom all the time. Sorry, I'm just going ahead and wiring. Does anybody have any questions?
I wondered about the scars on the trunk. Several days.
Yep, and they all have that seal on there.
How long would it take for them to
A long time. They will go away. But that's why they use that rubberized. It's like a rubberized, but it's more like a silicone. But there were cut marks that they sealed. So from time to time, you want to go back in there and make sure that you may have to reapply to make sure that that will go away. And it will heal over in time.
Is there any time you could use those cut marks to advantage? I mean, sometimes I think they make the trees.
Not on azaleas. Not on azalea.
But on other trees, maybe.
Not so much. I personally don't like them because it's like a bullseye.
So would they be less not annoying in 5 years? Or less?
What happens is with Satsuki Azalea, any large cut over a dime or $1 takes a long time to heal. And if it's not cleaned properly and the cambium is not cleaned around the edge perfectly and properly, it will not heal over and cover itself. So that's very important that you clean that area around and get it to heal over. Very important.
If it doesn't, does that mean you can go in and recut it?
Yeah, I would recut it again and make it try to do it. So, and it's going to take some time, so don't like do it every year because then you're just restarting the process over again. you'll start to actually see it heal itself. At that point, just let it go and it will heal itself on its own. It's just going to take time.
Are you bothered by deer or other problems?
Excuse me?
Are you bothered by deer or other animal problems?
Well, my dogs keep the deer away. Squirrels. They like to knock the fertilizer off. But that's about it. The deer usually don't come around because I have dogs. And they're up there all the time with me. And we have a lot of deer, so.
Still shooting across the street.
Mm-hmm. Like crazy. Deer season's around the corner.
Revolution.
Oh, I know what he's talking about now.
Well, where the question is going is human urine to repel deer if you don't have dogs. Is that good or bad? And how does that affect your bonsai? How good is fertilizer for bonsai?
I wouldn't do it. Would it hurt the tree? I don't know. If you want something that's more organic based and you want to keep deer away, there's a product out there called Deer Stopper. It works very well. The problem is you have to keep reapplying it. You just can't apply it once. You got to do it monthly.
To the tree or just to the area?
No, you can spray it on the tree. It won't hurt the tree. All it is egg whites, mint. So it doesn't smell so bad. Some of them smell like coyote urine and stuff. I didn't even want to go near the tree after I did that. So being a deer, I won't want to do the same thing. But the Deer Stopper seems to work. I haven't had to use it. Again, I have dogs. And then you won't have a problem. Deer Stopper works though.
I'm a lot of deer.
Oh, come on. That main branch broke off a long time ago, huh? Right here, yeah. Well, as I was saying before, when you have 10 people helping you repot 110 bonsai, if they're off 6 to 8 inches and the tree's okay, that's okay. Now, if that was Japan, that would be unacceptable. You'd be thrown out. You'd be the talk of the town. What, me? Yeah, I was for a while. I was gaijin.
Ryan told me where he was, they used to hit some of the older teachers. Used to,
No one ever hit me.
like, no one ever hit him either.
What, Ryan? You're talking Ryan Neal, right?
I don't think they hit Americans.
I don't think Kimura would hit anybody.
Well, I don't think it was Kimura, it was the other older guys that would hit him.
I could see that.
Because they never hit me. I was like, well, yeah, they probably hit the Americans.
He'll turn around and clock him. Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't.
No. Kimura's not the friendliest guy in the neighborhood, but he's not evil. He was one of my teacher's good friends. So what we were talking about a minute ago is boxwood blight. Boxwood blight, it doesn't affect azaleas, but boxwood blight affects all boxwoods, including Kingsville. Once you get it, there is no cure, and just get rid of your tree. So I do not sell or allow any boxwoods on my property because I don't want them. No more boxwoods.
How would you recognize the blight? Yellowing?
Branches just die off. There may be yellowing. The other thing is you'll see like warty-like foliage, and then all of a sudden the branch will just die back to nothing, which isn't uncommon. Well, if you saw, he's changing his name from Kingsville Grower to something else, because he's aware that Kingsvilles are not going to be anymore. Pakistanders get hit by the same thing. Yeah. There's one chemical that will slow it down, but will not cure it. So on this tree, I've cut quite a bit off because a lot of it is not needed. And because I'll keep this inside a warmer environment, it will not be a problem at all. I have one. Number 2 is going up shortly. Huh? No, the one is, I have one that's 30 by 72, 30 foot wide, 72 foot long. And the second one is going to be 44 by, I think, 25, somewhere around there. So anyway, this is almost to the end of wiring. And this is how I like to work on my azaleas. I don't like to wire a lot of branches. I like to cut them, because if I cut them, I know which way they're growing. And I can direct the growth. And whatever I'm cutting right now only means more buds will come out. I don't need that tag anymore. Gotta wire this one in the back yet, too. So this is the front in here. I have to finish wiring this back here because I didn't finish this yet. The other great thing about taking foliage off, you can see the branches. Don't care. Won't I do. But I let some of them bloom and others I just cut off. I mean, you'll get a couple blossoms on this. But for the most part, there won't be many. There will not be many.
Remind me when the bloom set. I mean, when do
They start setting now. I just cut them all off.
I mean, when does the bud start, flower bud starts forming?
They're forming now
For next year.
for next year. If they're not formed already, they're not finished yet, but they're forming. And I just cut most of them off. This tree has a couple fronts, just to let you know. So if this is my tree, I would put it in a round pot until I found the side I liked the most. The side I picked is the side I like the most for now, but that may change. There are trees out there like that, and this is one of them. You're welcome, you're welcome. You're welcome. Not a problem. I enjoy doing this. You're welcome. So anyway, just to, that's not the front. This could be front on the other side. So this is the other possible front. So the front I like is right here on this corner. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a piece of wire where I like the front. So the front that I like as of now is right here. Did everybody see that with the wire? So that's the front I like now. Okay? I like it because you can see the movement of the trunk. It has good branch placement. But I think they were also thinking about using this other side as the front, which also has decent branch placement. And you would see like a twin trunk tree, which is still very cool. Either way it would work, but this side would be the other front. So that's a good front possibility as well. So some people will like this side, and some people will like this side over here. That's why I said put it around. I was fighting in my head, because this side here looks good too, but I think the other side would work as well too, that one there. So if you put it in a round pot, this is one of those trees, you get tired of one side, you just spin it to the other.
And that right there, you just get right where your hand is, where your hand was, you just get sort of out.
This here? No. It's got too many scars. And this has got scars over here too. This has less scars here. That's why I picked that as the front, most likely.
Scars are definitely a negative.
That's a negative. A negative. So the best bonsais you'll see will have the least amount of scars.